Week 2, A History of Psychology in the Contrast of Christian Faith. In history, we learn of Jonathan Christian Riehl, who was a only son of a Lutheran pastor, Julius Riehl. Riehl was most influential in his arguments of medical science in the late 18th century. He divided medicine into three fields: physiology, anatomy, and psychiatry. He made important contributions in these in his early work on a non-visualistic psychology. His studies in anatomical psychology and the nervous system was pioneering, and his reform of mental institutions and asylums were legendary. He also discussed the enthusiasm of having witnessed many killings, beatings of patients, and generally by suffocation. Riehl argued that classical science and education against those apostles of utility was valued and practical was not necessary. He argued in 1804 in an essay called Pepperium for a split-track educational system with physicians attending his university for training in sciences. And he also came up with basic rules for treatment of these mental conditions. Then there's also Benjamin Rush, who is best known for his American Revolution signing of the Declaration of Independence. Rush was also known for his efforts and reform of the caregiving of the mentally ill. He was a father of American psychiatry. He was the first to study mental illness and the disease as not being a possession of demons. His classic work on the mind was a psychiatric textbook printed in the United States. Benjamin Rush developed two mechanical devices to aid the treatment of the insane and of madness and the inflammation of the brain. This was called a tranquility chair. This chair was supposed to work, but blood would flow to the brain by lessening the muscular action of reducing motor activity. This worked, but it had its downsides, and sometimes it did more harm than good. But Rush's convictions led him to a few recognized that mental illness could be diagnosed and treated humanely. Devoting himself to the treatment of the insane, he was instrumental in upgrading patient care and not just simply locking them up or putting them in restraints. Benjamin Rush created humane ways of treating them rather than the straitjacket. Benjamin Rush was also a pioneer in the establishment of occupational therapy, encouraging patients to sew, to garden, listen to music, or exercise daily. We also learned that David G. Meyer had definitions of mainstream psychology, which were viewed over a period of time. William James, the principle of psychology, 1890, discussed psychology as a science of mental life. He signified the history of defining psychology as a science of behavior and mental illness. Psychology, or psychological science, was sometimes asked or reconciled to the commitment of psychological science, but we look at this as in the Christian faith. How do they fit together? Are they mutually supportive? Are these points have any tension? They fit together nicely. A humble faith in God and awareness of human fertility and rigorous open-minded science. Psychology can support the Bible and theological wisdom if reviewed through a lens of ancient biblical wisdom and modern psychological science. The story of the human nature could be much in the same. The discoveries of psychological science do challenge some traditional Christian understanding, but they don't have to. Many secularists and Christians alike see science and faith as enemies, but they don't need to. Sam Harris argues that religion is both false and dangerous. Richard Dawkins agrees that faith is not only wrong, but a mental virus. Dawkins also notes that in history, it shows that creatures of God are faulty and have no knowledge of science. But this is further from the truth. If we looked at Christians' convictions that were spoken of by Blaise Pascal, Francis Bacon, or Isaac Newton, we see that human institution that explores God and creation submit ideas that such Christian psychologists and neurologists as Donald McKay encourage us that to know such science could be a revolution in the understanding of the mind from a Christian perspective. The reality comes about in applying the Bible to much of these science. Psychology might be understood as a social and virtual experience of the mind and its understanding of love. A theologian might describe God-given love in human relations as described in various levels. For example, the brain is in a state of emotional love, causing the brain to understand things in different ways depending on the type of love that is being revealed. Although religious taboo has a divine moral absolute, with such biological terms, it doesn't have to. It can inbreed a sociological Christian view in marital and family units. Postmodernists and fundamentalists often resist psychological science, but this doesn't have to be ideologically loaded and not swallowed in a theological aspect, but it can be used and does not have to be hidden in Christian values. It is better to humble ourselves before reliable evidence and not use presumptions, but do not fall into aspects of giving in to such wrong ideas, but understanding where these ideas come from, using our intellectualness and comparing the Bible to these, and do not let cultural bend our Christian views, but bend the culture to our Christian views. Social science can be productive if looked at in a pure way. We must believe that this hypothesis does not have to be buried in our cerebral hemisphere, but it can create many aspects of new sociological science. Ironically, it can create a confirmation bias or belief perseverance. But let us be confident in this phenomenon and to understand that Christianity and psychological science can work together without compromising our faith.